What's up, everybody? It's Concrete Zebra with Craftmaster Productions, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make a Maybach music style beat. What's up, everybody? It's Concrete Zebra with Craftmaster Productions and Studio1Tutorials.com. Today we're going to be looking at how to make a Maybach music style beat. First, I just want to remind you guys to go over and head over to the site Studio1Tutorials.com. Put it in your bookmarks. You can also get a hold of the Miami Subs 808 edition over there under the Sound Kits tabs. I'm working with another producer, Maybach Rico, on a joint venture. We're going to be releasing a pack called Travis Scott Drums, where it's going to be just a whole bunch of drum kits, one shots, and loops in the style of Travis Scott. So that's really cool. You guys can look forward to that. I want to say what's up to the new subscribers: Sharon Rhodes, Queens NYC 234, Edmund Snyder, Martel Clark, DJ Malik, Brian Thompson, Vaughn James, Snap Ghost, Otis Richardson, Unsound Method UK, Deborah Hulskamp, and Eddie Gleaton. I appreciate you guys' support. Thanks for subscribing. I just subbed up all you guys' channels. I want you other guys to do the same. Let's connect, build, and continue to grow this community. All right, now if you're familiar with the channel, I have a video up. It's called MMG Chords, and that's where basically we went over how to go ahead and get this progression. So if you guys want to go ahead and watch that, if you haven't seen that that one already, that'll be a good job to catch up. The thing about and here we're talking about a Maybach music beat. We're not just necessarily talking about a Ross beat or something that an MMG artist would be on, because they do trap, they do boom bap, they go across the whole spectrum. This is specifically focusing on the the Maybach music 1, 2, and 3 tracks. The thing that made those beats special, and it kind of took hip hop by storm, was that they're based around these really excellent well orchestrated songs, really great samples. And the way the Justice League would attack those samples is they would go ahead, sample it, loop it, build around it, then they would come back and replay the parts. And the thing that made them really special was there was variation in the parts. It wasn't that you built this nice 8-bar loop that was riding and then you went and just muted parts of it and arranged them and had a song. Like there was actual movement, there was bridges. So you want to keep that in mind if you're going to attempt to make this type of track. The first thing that I want to look at right now is the drums. That's where after I did the chord progression, that's naturally the next place that I went. So my kick track, the first thing you want to do is you want to start with a kick again that has a shorter release. You don't need one of these kick samples that's really loud and woofy. You just want something like this. You just want to focus on something that's really punchy. Originally, this was this, you can hear it if you listen to it, the way it kind of tails off. This was a regular acoustic kick sample, and we just shortened the release so that all you really heard was the attack. The actual pattern, what makes this this thing a little bit more special, is if you go ahead and pay attention to the grid, is everywhere where I have the 16th notes coming in, I took and manually bumped them off the grid a little bit to add a swing to it, just to taste. That way it doesn't sound so robotic. It kind of gives you that nice old hip hop vibe. Moving on to the snare, we went with another snare that has a short release. It's nice and quick. And that's because in this pattern, when you're triggering it, it's you can see they bunch up a little bit together, and you want to make sure that you have something that isn't going to have a whole bunch of overlap when you play those samples. So this is what they sound like together. Now, if you listen to it, you notice it has a really live feel, and the way that you kind of achieve this is a couple different things you want to keep in mind. One, you want to make sure that you have a varied velocity on your hits. Your main hits that are happening on your on your twos and your fours. You want to make sure those are at the loudest velocity, and then wherever you add a roll, like here, you want to kind of you step that velocity up so that when it hits, it sounds more like a drummer, because that's how a drummer is going to play it. They're gonna kind of build up to the full hit when they do a roll. It's just the way that that our hands work when we're doing that. The most important part about this that really gives it the live character is this note right here. If you listen to it, adding rolls and everything helps to add a live feel. But if you really want to get a live feel, you want to add what's called a snare flam, is the articulation. And the way that you add those, and that's this little guy right here, is you set your grid to the lowest resolution possible. 164 usually works. And then before you get to your snare, you just add it right here and make sure the velocity is really low, like it's almost a ghost note. And you can hear the difference in how stiff it sounds without it. Watch. It's very dry and unimpressive. And now with it, that really adds to the human factor, is adding those. You don't want to add them everywhere, because a flam, it's kind of like an accidental tap when the drummer is raising his hand up off the snare. It's something that's a little bit more random, so you want to keep that in mind when you're programming those. The next thing that give these beats their character are the tom rolls. The toms, they really add a sense of urgency and a busyness to the track, and it kind of pushes and drives everything. So the way that I start out with with my tom rolls is I'll add them in triplets. That's usually a good way to go. And when you get to, you want to make sure also that you're not just doing just one pitch, especially when you get to a roll further down on, like the turnaround roll, because it's going to add a more realistic feel of, say, a drummer hitting a low tom, a high tom, and a mid tom. So this is what this pattern sounds like all together now. Now you hear that I've got my reverb, my plate reverb. That's what I use for my drum bus. I like to use reverb on these tracks because it adds that studio ambiance to it. Makes the tom sound a little bit bigger, and it gives the more epic feel to it. The other thing that I do with the toms to make them sound more live is, because the way that the toms are arranged on a I was gonna say a drum machine, on a drum set, is they're arranged from left to right. They're not just all down the center. And when you stand in front of a drum set and you listen to a drummer play, you'll hear him go left to right. So when you do your pitches, you want to add that panning. And the way that I add that effect in Studio One is I will go ahead and press A, and that'll bring up your automation menus. That's what these are right here. And if you're using sample 1, you have to go to add and remove, and you go down to audio, open this folder, and see, previously this wasn't here. You go to pan, click add, close, and then to make that effect that I have from going left to right is you just come in with your pointer tool and draw it. And then everywhere, you can handle it one or two ways. You know, you could highlight all the points, hold Alt, click and drag to the next section, or once you have them, you can just press A again to get out of this view. Hold down Alt, click and drag, and then when you press A, the automation information copies itself to the MIDI event, which is a pretty cool feature about Studio One. It saves you a lot of time messing around with copying and pasting your automation. So that is another thing that I really enjoy about this program. So the next section that I had after I had the chords and the drums, you know, I'm listening to it. The thing about these beats is they have that very nice, lush chordal arrangement that's really mellow and laid back. So in order to add the urgency, to make it more of a hip-hop vibe, to make it more urban, to make it more aggressive, you really got to add that with the percussion. And that's kind of, you know, the linchpin of these tracks here is what's going on in the high register in your percussion. You see, I have two hi-hats, a ride, and a crash. That's what's going to add the excitement. So with your hi-hats, you want to, you know, this beat isn't straight time, so you're going to want to start with something, you know, something fast and busy, something in 16th notes. And another thing, you know, make sure you vary the velocity, because you know, you're keeping in mind that you're going for a live feel. When you use sample 1, you make sure that you turn this velocity knob all the way to the right, so that otherwise it won't register what you're doing down here. And you want to make sure, you know, your first hit, that's going to come on at full velocity. Your third hit, this is in the 16th note pattern, you know, you're going to bump that down a little bit. And then these two, you just make those a little bit lower than your middle hit, right? And then once you have that, you can just copy and paste that over and over, and you'll get a nice up and down feel. Yeah, I mean, this is all a matter of taste. For stuff like this, I don't like to add the triplet hi-hat rolls and make them real ignorant. You know, I try to keep it, you know, something that a drummer could realistically play. That's why I add these spaces here, because this is where I'm going to have my open hi-hats. All right, so you hear it start to come together a little bit better now. The next thing you're going to want to add is a ride. This is something that is very underused in hip hop. It's a really cool cymbal, and here's the difference that you have with that included in the track. And then of course to add the epic factor, you just put a crash in the beginning. All right, no sweat, nothing to it. Then I started to get to work on the bass. The bass was, I used the bass out of Complete. You want to get some type of VST or some type of realistic bass sound. You could use a sub bass if you wanted to, but you want to kind of stick with the theme of recreating a sample, and using an instrument that has this type of articulation. Okay, so the way that I came up with this bass was I did the if you watch the method that we use in the original tutorial with the finding the root notes, I just copied the root notes down, and then I started just listening to the drums, just started cutting up these notes to kind of to start making like a plucking, moving of the fingers. It's very rare that you're gonna find a bass player who's gonna just play these long notes. That's what makes them, a good bass player, is how they pluck the bass in relationship to the kicks. So once I had the notes that I needed in order to figure out how I wanted to kind of come up with that effect of having an actual bass player, is I bring up the kick and I seen that, okay, I have a note here, so let me go ahead and chop this note here. I see that, I got a kick here, so let me extend this, shorten this one, and then you see I'm starting to line up, some of my hits with kicks. And now when you listen to it, it'll move with the kicks. Now, if you listen to this part, this is what you call a turnaround. This is when it's getting ready to go back to the first bar. And when you're making something that's more, based on live instrumentation, a bass player, their last note, that's where they really show off their skill. And their skill is being able to move their fingers and pluck the right notes and make something, impressive. So what you're going to want to do is, this last note right here, what this was just this, right? And what I did was I hit my number 2 tool to bring up my my slicer, and I just cut here, cut here, cut here, and cut here. And then I just started moving notes around with my vertical snap, because I knew in my head I wanted it to go do no no no, and in order to get that sound, all I needed was these notes. I moved them around until I came up with this. For the processing, I used the Q10. This is a really awesome EQ. If you don't have it, you guys should get it. Even if you just buy it as a single plugin, just for this bass tilt preset, makes all the difference in the world in your bass sound. And I used this was a starting point, this preset, just to bring out more of the bass in the mix. So after I had that line taken care of, the next thing that you're going to need to do is thicken up the track. This is what you have so far. So in order to keep on with like this epic feel that we got growing, I went straight to low brass. And this is just the Hollywood brass out of Nexus, nothing crazy. And what I did here was I just took the if you notice, this is the bass line. So I just copied this region, moved it up here, and then what I have this doing here is playing octaves. See, so it already started it started out like super low. So first I had this. So that was nice. I could feel it, but I couldn't hear it. And if you ever get into a situation where you're trying to thicken the low end and you can feel something but you can't hear it, instead of reaching for a plug-in or a bass enhancer or adding distortion, sometimes all you need to do is just stack it with an octave of its same of the same instrument. So I did that. As you can see, my lower velocities were kind of low. And I did this as a function as to kind of make the higher ones stand out. So I just raised these velocities all the way to full, left these, low down here so that the stuff that's in the higher register of this instrument would stand out. And this is what it sounds like. I added this limiter on it just to kind of even out the sustain on the sounds. And it just gave it a really grungy effect. I like that. So moving on, the next part that I needed to do was to get an actual high brass sound for the hooks, just to kind of really enforce the epicness of it. If you're trying to make stuff that sounds epic, you can't go wrong with brass, right? So for this instrument, I used the Studio Linked VST Maybach Empire and their hip hop brass. I remember when these beats were really popular and I was doing a bunch of them. I was so excited, to get this from them because it just made searching for sounds easier. Before, I used to have to stack brass out of a few different VSTs, and I could do it all in this all in Contact. And I really like this one for their add-on section. It makes it really easy to go ahead and stack brass together. So this is what I had at first. And for the notes, again, all I did was copy the low brass section. I used the same exact melody. So without the add-on, this is what it sounds like. So that's cool, but it's a little thin. So I went in and I found this sound. So once I had those two together, I went ahead and listened to what I got now. So it's nice, it's nice. It's starting to come together, but I needed something else to really help that sound cut through the mix. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of tones being played right now. So I thought that a synth brass would help me out with that, and I the same thing, just copied and pasted the original melody. And found this patch in Omnisphere. Now, when you listen to that by itself, it sounds weird. It sounds like some '80s, Total Recall soundtrack vibes. But when you take airy, synthy sounds like that, and you stack them with an acoustic instrument, and you kind of lower it, you wind up making these really cool tones. And this is what you have when you have it all together. So it just gives everything a little bit more body, and that's what we needed. The next thing that I wanted was like an epic string run, something with something that really accented the walk up at the end on the bass and the horns, but that wasn't playing the same exact notes. Something like when I was telling you guys about melodies, if you have a slower melody, you can kind of counter it with a faster melody to add some more interest. So that's what I wanted to do here. And all I really did was, in order to build this, I know it might look complicated and fancy, but all I did was I went ahead and I clicked in 16th notes. Like I was like like right here, boom, 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 and then I started moving them around. Like literally just started on F and started going up and down, up and down, and then in order to get more movement, because when you have it, I'll play it for you so you can understand what's going on. Originally I had the run and it sounded like this. And that's fine, that's cool or whatever, but you can really make it sound a lot more interesting if you just select a couple of your basic notes, and then just move them around until you get the sound that's a little bit more interesting. See how much more urgent that sounds? So that really added like a frenzied sound, and I like that. So this is what the loop wound up sounding like. And that sound is just, the cheesy ass final strings from Nexus, nothing crazy. Sometimes those sounds really work for certain things, for fast strings, that preset, they have a really sharp attack. So you go ahead and use it. So that's my hook. For the intro, when you listen to it and you pay attention to the piano, that you see, if you notice that I have some more notes in there from the beginning. So what I did there, the reason why I added these top notes to my chords is because you make it sound more authentic as an intro. It's very rare that you're going to find a piano player that's going to be content just playing the same few chords over and over. Like they always want to improvise. That's how they learn to play. So in order to make something that sounds improvised, the key to it is varying your note durations. What I mean by that is, you see here I've got a couple quarter notes, and then you want to skip over to your next bar, and then you want to use some eighth notes, and then you could go back to quarter notes, and then you go back to 16th notes. And that's what's really going to add an improvised sound, because if someone's improvising, they're just not going to play quarter notes or eighth notes. What's going on with the piano player is they're trying to find something. So in the course of trying to find something, they're going to try out different note variations. So that's another thing that you want to keep in mind when you're trying to make a realistic sounding piano melody. And this section right here is only used on the intro, I believe. I think I might have brought it back in other parts. Yeah, I brought it back before the hook, I think. But the point is when that part comes in, it sounds, it sounds like there's a band playing this, and that's the feature that we're going for. So moving on to the actual arrangement, because this is where you're really going to shine as a producer, is how you put together these patterns. So the first 4 bars of the beat is this. Now, the thinking behind this is, me. If you start watching more of my tutorials, you'll notice that I always take the hi-hats out for the first 4 bars, because I just think that it's a really easy trick to bring down the intensity of the track, let the rapper warm up, and I always put a drop in the percussion before the second part of the verse comes on, because it just kind of gives this section an intro-ish type theme. I also left in the toms, because you'll hear this in a lot of songs that have these tom rolls. Actual songs where drummers playing, that's usually something that's common, because it takes 2 hands to play the toms. So you can't be playing the toms while you're hitting a snare and a hi-hat and a ride at a crash, So little things like that, thinking about how a drummer actually plays the drums and what he's going to be able to do with his hands, is going to make your patterns a lot more realistic. Then moving on to the second part of the verse, I just bring in all of the percussion. So you go from this part to this one. Okay, now for this next section, this is where you're really going to show your dedication to making this legit, because it's very easy just to go ahead, and leave this section as is, and it'll ride out. It'll be fine. But, like I always say in the videos, is you got to add some type of subtle variation or, extreme variation inside each 4-bar part. So what I did here was I changed the hi-hat pattern a little bit. You see, this is like more of a straight 16 run, and then over here, I deleted just four hits to make this an 8th note part. And what it does is it kind of slows down the rhythm on this bar, and it gives it a nice little effect. I know when rappers are writing their rhymes and they're working out their flow and how they're going to sound, a lot of how they find their actual flow of their lyrics is how the hi-hats move to the snare. So you could keep that in mind when you're arranging, and just a small little hi-hat variation will do a lot. And this is what you have. Now the next part, I took out the hi-hats again. I took out the first tom roll to give you something really different. I changed the ride, and I made that more intense because I had more room to do that now that I don't have hi-hats in here. And then I took the brass out, and the low brass and the bass rather, in order to kind of open up the track and build a sense of tension, because again, as you're putting together this puzzle for the listener's ear before the hook, you want to give them a surprise and a relief once all those instruments come back up. So this is what it winds up sounding like. As a matter of fact, I was just hearing something right now. I bet this will sound really cool.
Maybach music.
So, all I did for this part here was I took the piano out, I just left the strings, and I wound up adding an electric guitar. It didn't start as an electric guitar. I used this fingerstyle 6-string because the articulation on it, again, we're trying to make something that sounds realistic. The articulation on it, when you listen to it, it sounds like there's actually fingers plucking the guitar. You really hear it come out on the high notes. The way that I programmed this was I started on the root note, and then I just started walking up the scale, clicking in notes, finding something that sounded good. Because I wanted to, take the listener up, start them down low, and then, just take them on this little quick emotional journey where they go up. But first, I had to do something about the way that guitar sounded. So I started with the preset inside Guitar Rig, but I wanted to show you guys who maybe don't have Guitar Rig, Empire. It's a stock plugin. It's really awesome. It completely does the job. I'll show you this. This is my Guitar Rig version.
Maybach music.
And then here's what Native Intro or not it Presonus gives you for free when you buy Studio One. In people love guitar rig, dude. So as you can hear, there is not a lot of difference at all, and you have that plug-in. When you're making guitar parts, you want to pull up your pitch bend automation, and you definitely want to add either some up pitches or some down pitches to the melody, because that's going to give you, the feeling of a guitar player, holding down a string and bending the notes. They do that a lot. That's a really cool trick. And you got to remember, like, people who play instruments, they don't just pluck notes. They're always manipulating the instrument to get a signature sound. So you have to remember, when you're trying to do these beats, I'm gonna say it again and again, you can't just click the notes in. You have to add some kind of pitch automation or liven it up. So this is what it wound up sounding like. Then the same thing that I've been saying about the people who play instruments. They're not just going to play the same phrase over and over again, especially a guitar player. The guitar player is not going to play just four notes over and over again. It's actually going to hurt their hands doing it like that. Guitar players are judged by their skill in how fast they can play. So if you got a guitar player and he's a good guitar player and he's playing on your track, he's gonna speed up at some point. Now, you don't have to, for a hip hop song, you don't have to go to the point of heavy metal, but as you could see, I took my first note and I chopped it in half and then moved it. Then I took the third note, chopped it in half, and then I chopped this one in half and then chopped it in half again. And then, made this chop and brought it down. And that's all I do is I just, chop and move stuff around and play it. And I came up with this. And that's all you got to do to get a realistic guitar sound. Is you have to vary the melody, make sure you're not just playing long notes, and make sure that you're picking a guitar preset that is that really sounds like someone's plucking the strings. For this part, I just chose to go in with it's the same tom roll that I've been using throughout the whole thing, and I used I just made a quick snare roll to kind of add to the epicness. And then from that, we go into, all I did was copy and paste the last 4 bars of the first verse over here, and I brought them in over here, and then that goes into the chorus. So the second verse winds up sounding like this.
Maybach music. Maybach music. Maybach music.
So in this part of the verse right here, where you heard those cool little guitar plucks, in order to get that sound, it's the same guitar part as from over here, but what I did was I shortened the notes that were being affected by the pitch bend, and I just made them as long as the pitch bend, except for this one, because that's, you know, your last note. I wanted to feel that whole note, and then that way you kind of just get this cool little this cool little effect that guitar players will do when they're showing off, trying to add flavor to a track. So, you know, as you could see, you know, the basic instrumentation of the track isn't that difficult. I mean, it's just chords that are stacked on top of each other. You know, the bass line is the lead melody. So you really only have a chord progression and one melody for the majority of the track. It's just on different instruments, played with different articulations. The string run, you know, is something that's fairly simple to do. And, you know, now that you know how to program the guitar part, that's a really simple piece too. The main thing that you got to take away from this tutorial is, if you're going to try to make a song like this and have it sound authentic and not cheesy, is you got to do the work to make the first verse and the second verse really independent and unique. You know, this second verse, you see, this is a brand new piece, this is a brand new piece, and then even though I brought back you know, this section from the first verse, is, you know, I added this new guitar part on top of it. So that's really, you know, when you play that for a rapper, they're really going to be impressed with what you can do, you know, as a as a musician or a computer musician, and as a producer. This is, you know, you show somebody a track like this and they're really going to be like, oh, okay, you know music, you have musical skills. And you know, once you start creating things like this, you will. So, you know, that's what you want to take away from it. You want to vary your percussion. Remember the snare flams. And just know that, you know, when you hear something and you're like, wow, man, that's a crazy track. It's, you know, it's so complicated. Most of the time it's really not. It's just the person who made it had an extreme attention to detail, and that's what these are all about. So don't forget to stop by studio1tutorials.com and get your Miami Subs 808 edition. I want to hear what you guys make with that. Thanks again to the new subscribers. This is Concrete Zebra with Craftmaster Productions. I'll see y'all on the next one.